Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'm joining you all today as a settler and guest from the traditional territory and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot nations, colonially known as Mississauga in Ontario. And I think as we talk about the inner development goals, it's important to recognize that Indigenous peoples have recognized the importance of this inner work since time immemorial. And I think the Indigenous medicine wheel beautifully captures this, which varies from culture to culture, but one of its many attributes is the different aspects of our well-being. So going beyond our physical health to consider aspects of mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions, which I think the IDGs very much get to. Additionally, when I was looking through the skills and qualities of the IDGs, one that really stuck out was long-term orientation and visioning, which immediately reminded me of the seventh generation principle of the Haudenosaunee, which recognizes that we need to consider the impact of our decisions today, 7 generations into the future, whether that's on each other or on our planet. And so to me, this work very much emphasizes the importance of centering Indigenous knowledge and wisdom in our work. We're really excited to be joined today by Arielle Goodman and Jamie Bristow from the Inner Development Goals, who both bring an incredible mix of perspectives and experiences to our discussion today. Jamie Bristow is a prominent expert on the application of inner development and contemplative practices in public life. He currently leads on public narrative and policy development for the Inner Development Goals, emphasizing the inner skills and qualities needed for a sustainable transition. And we also have Arielle Goodman, who's the co-founder of Unlimited Boundaries, working at the intersection of personal transformation, organizational development, and planetary justice and renewal. And she is the hubs and network coordinator for the Inner Development Goals, building community around the people and organizations supporting these skills and qualities. So Jamie's going to start us off with a mindfulness practice and then some reflections on the qualities, skills, and abilities that you've been thinking about and sharing in the chat. I'll turn it over to you, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Prachir. And um, let's spend a few beats landing here in this. We're not in a room together. I can't see you, but I'm doing my best to hold you in my mind and in my heart as I'm speaking to you now. And so we'll start out, if you wish, and please, this is invitational. Checking in with how our bodies are doing. Feeling, if you're sitting in a chair, the feeling of the sit bones on the chair or sofa or wherever you are, feet on the floor, and closing the eyes if that's supportive to you, to get this sense of kind of presence and arriving and grounding. It can be really helpful to tune into that lower half of the body, the feet, the legs, the buttocks, thighs, and the hip bones, to tune into a sense of solidity, stability. Then rising up from that base, from that foundation, the spine, sense of uprightness and alertness, perhaps, embodying a sense of attentiveness, openness that you'd like to bring to this session together. And also the relaxation and the settledness that you might feel in the belly, like allowing the abdomen to drop and the belly to relax. And maybe then tuning into the breath, if that's available to you. Feel free to stay with the feeling of feet on the floor. But if it's supportive, to tether yourself to this present moment, tuning into the rhythm of the breath, the rising and the falling, expansion and contraction, the rhythm of life. And then also acknowledging the feelings that you're bringing to this session. It might be a sense of rushing to get here in time. Letting go or letting drop the things you want to leave behind. And maybe tuning into those things which we want to bring with us, to cultivate, to hold in heart and mind. And I'd like to offer one suggestion. I am so grateful that you're joining us here today. What intention has brought you here? Tuning into that feeling of perhaps it's because you want the world to be better, healthier, happier in some way. And that maybe what we have to talk about today is supportive to your work. So maybe tuning into that intention, subtle or clear, of intending to be part, of contributing to things being better in some way. That beautiful intention, if it's available to you, if it's around, it's appreciating perhaps that precious, beautiful intention. And I offer a reflection now that we'll turn into a poll in a moment, which is, in what ways do you intentionally cultivate positive qualities of heart and mind in order to be more at service or happier in the world? It doesn't have to be a meditation. It can be close reading or listening, practicing listening better. Just dropping that question in before we close the practice by opening the eyes if they've been closed. Having a stretch, wiggling fingers, if that's helpful. So I'm really curious to hear some, or read some answers there. If you have a personal practice of any form, what is it that you try and do? What is it you try and cultivate? I think I'm gonna hand it back over to you now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jamie. I wish we could start every call in that way. Honestly, I think we all come into these sessions with a lot on our hearts and in our minds. And so I think doing this inner work is a very, very appropriate way to sort of kick ourselves off this webinar and talking about this inner work that's so important to achieving the SDGs. So thank you for leading us through that. So it looks like we have a lot of folks on the call who are curious to learn more about the IDGs, getting to develop an understanding of how this is being applied in communities and hearing about some real examples. And then also looking at how we can bring it to our own organizations and communities that we're working in. And we also have the questions about how you're cultivating qualities of heart and mind in any form. And I'm seeing responses about meditating, walking in nature, journaling, practicing thoughts of gratitude, yoga, nourishment through food and movement, contemplation, art, poetry, advocacy, leading with service, seeing a lot about nature and gratitude. So definitely seeing some common themes here. Thanks so much, everyone, for sharing your thoughts there. So I think to help frame us for the rest of our conversation, I thought it would be great for each of us to first share from each of our perspectives, Jamie and Arielle, the why of this work. And maybe I can start us off with Tamarack's interest in the IDGs, and then I'll pass it to you, Arielle, and then Jamie. So I think for myself and for Tamarack, I think it's important to remind ourselves of the Sustainable Development Goals, which the Inner Development Goals were created in support of. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the SDGs, They were adapted by the United Nations in 2015 as this global vision for a more peaceful and prosperous world by 2030. And while these goals address everything from poverty to climate action, you'll notice that they have one thing in common, and that's that they all focus on the work we need to do outside of ourselves in the world to address our social and environmental issues. But I think at Tamarack, we very much recognize that the how of this work is just as important as the what. How are each of us showing up as we identify challenges, brainstorm solutions, and work with each other to bring them to life? What skills and qualities do we as change makers need in our communities need to achieve the SDGs? And I think to me, that's exactly what the IDGs are about. And so those are my perspectives, but Arielle, I'd love to turn to you and then Jamie for your why for this work.
Thank you so much, Prachir. I'm so grateful to be here today and really excited to be in the inquiry with all of you. So much of what you shared resonates. This quote by the extraordinary activist Grace Lee Boggs really lands deeply for me. Transform yourself to transform the world. And I think, since I was a little girl, I could see the disconnect between what people said and their behaviors. And then as I grew older, I saw the disconnect between organizations that I so deeply cared about around social justice. Somehow, a lot of times their behaviors did not match their deepest aspirations, and continue to see this in movement spaces. So as we bring life to the futures that we want to create, it's so important that we consider the perspective, the inner dimensions that we come from, so we don't recreate the patterns that we all know don't serve flourishing life. So that's my deeper why and why I'm here.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Arielle, and I'll turn it to you, Jamie.
I think one of the whys for me is that we are struggling to address our biggest problems. And this is calling us to go deeper into why there are problems and why we have problems, and deeper into potential solutions. Whether it's inequality or sustainability issues, these tend to have been treated like external, material, technical problems. When I say technical, it's like it's complicated, but we have a pathway. We sort of know what we're doing, like building an airplane or doing heart surgery or something. You and I might struggle, but someone out there knows how to do it, and they can do it as they are now. But scientists, researchers are starting to see that these complex, messy problems are actually more adaptive, meaning that we are part of the people trying to solve them are part of the problem too. The way that we think about the problem in the first place is part of the problem. And so with learning and growth and change are part of the response that we need now. And the longer that goes on, and the more tricky we find it to make any kind of progress, or at least progress that is commensurate to the size of the challenge, the more we realize that the changes we need are, the deeper we realize the changes that we need are. And so in order to be more equal to our times, to handle the complexity of the world that our, in many ways, great progress has created, we need to develop ourselves. And there's now decades worth of science that backs up, as you mentioned before, the indigenous wisdom, the religious traditions, like in particularly Asian traditions, that say that we can change. Through practice, our brains can rewire, and if you're into that neuroscience stuff to back up what is common sense, practice will reshape our lives, reshape our experience, reshape who we can be and how we can show up. And this evidence needs to get out of the silos of academia and into organizations, which are often decades behind actually what the research is telling us is possible. And so that's the why, really. Like, we know this is we have these urgent challenges. We need to be more equal to them. We can't wait the decades that it often requires for this evidence about how we can be more equal to the challenge to get out there. So we need some accessible communication frameworks, essentially, to popularize this. And that's that's the why of that the Inner Development Goals is trying to meet.
Thanks so much for sharing, Jamie. I think Arielle and Jamie, both of what you shared resonated a lot with me. I think Arielle, to your point, I think as sort of noble and ambitious as our intentions can be, I think this work very much shows that we need to cultivate that practice to support those goals and dreams that we have for a better world. And Jamie, I think it's interesting because I think when I heard that framing of, us being part of the problems that we're dealing with, I think it's almost comforting in a way because I think it sort of shows to us that because we're a part of the problem, we can also be a part of the solution, and that it's sort of within our control and within our power. And to have that helpful reminder that while it can sometimes be easy to get stuck in our ways, that through practice, there is an opportunity to cultivate these skills and qualities that we need to achieve these goals that we have for a better world. So thanks so much for those reflections. And I think now that we've, established the perspectives that each of us are bringing sort of for the why of this work, Jamie, maybe you could speak a bit more to what exactly the IDGs are and how they were created. And then I'll turn it over to you, Arielle, if there's anything you'd want to add.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Prachir. And it does give me hope as well, because it feels like we haven't made enough progress. Like, what are we, can we really do this? And then when you start to see the reasons why we haven't made so much progress and realize actually we can change those things, that actually we can have goals for being better at meeting our goals. And actually doing that perhaps for the first time, including an inner dimension, means that we might be able to unlock this intractable situation, and indeed create tipping points, not just the kind of tipping points you hear about in climate science, the scary ones, but there can be cultural, psychological tipping points that are waiting to go as soon as we actually put any kind of emphasis in this direction. So yeah, let me share some slides, and I'll introduce what these inner development goals are, and as in what are the 23 skills that make up this framework. So as I said, like, there is an urgent need. Can you see my slide? Can I get a nod from? Yeah, great. So there is an urgent need to increase our collective abilities to face and effectively work with complex challenges. Together with over 1,000 scientists, experts, and practitioners, we've created a framework by asking the same question that we asked as a kind of check-in question. What are the skills, qualities, and capacities that we need in order to create a more sustainable and equitably prosperous world? And this is modeled, of course, on the Sustainable Development Goals, which did a great job of creating a communications framework to find the kind of simplicity beyond complexity, to kind of boil it down in a way that can be understood and worked on through international collaboration. And actually, one of the founding organizations behind the Inner Development Goals was the communications agency that designed the kind of the visuals for the Sustainable Development Goals. So you might see some similarities here. And so, having asked these 1,000 experts, and different researchers then independently went through that data to see what the patterns are. Obviously, ask 1,000 people, you have 1,000 slightly different answers, but you can categorize them. I think it was something like 80% of what was said could be categorized into a relatively small number of skills. And then we had to find the task of making them easy to kind of categorize and communicate. And I came up with 5 domains of being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. So within the being domain, relationship to self, we have things like inner compass, openness and learning mindset, presence. I'll come back to some of these in more detail. In thinking, we have critical thinking, also things like sense-making and long-term orientation that you mentioned earlier, Prachir. In relating, we have appreciation, connectedness, humility, empathy, and compassion. In collaboration, communication skills, things like trust, mobilization skills, how we sort of lead and inspire others. And in acting, of course, last but definitely not least, we have how we put this all into manifest things in the world through perseverance, creativity, courage, etc. So the inner development goals as a framework, it's also an organization. So we've got these sort of co-initiating organizations that came together to create this concept, to create the initiative, and it's now a separate non-profit organization that has many friends, thankfully. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development, some of the world's top universities, business schools, sustainability centers, like the Stockholm Resilience Center, and increasingly collaborating partners like IKEA and Google, who are using the IDG framework to shape their learning and development for their colleagues. And this is all sort of steered by some of the leading experts and thinkers in the space. I'll just flash that up again. That was a bit quick. So some of these people, like Robert Keegan, are the godfathers of adult development theory and stuff. Arielle, I'm sure, is going to talk about this, that as well as it being something that we've been working with big companies on, it's very much a grassroots, bottom-up movement as well as attracting the attention of in this case, the president of Costa Rica, but we're working with groups in the White House, in some of the UK government departments, and government entities across the world as well, who are interested in using the inner development goals to shape, say, training for public servants or climate literacy in schools. Okay, so let's go back to the actual skills here. And maybe have a little bit of taste of this. So we had a taste of a meditation to come with one part of what it is to develop a relationship to a self and that kind of being skill set. But it isn't just about mindfulness and meditation. And I want to draw our awareness here to this inner compass, which it's so important when it comes to sustainability and complex social issues. And it turns out that going through workshops and doing exercises to make your own values explicit and to make intentions to live more in line with those values has a huge impact. And this is stuff that's relatively easy for us to do, but the vast majority of people have never really asked themselves that question. Like, what do I most value? What are the principles that I want to live by? Then we have, hang on a second, this is now just going really slowly. There we go. On to thinking. I'd like to do a little bit of, how are we doing for time, Prachir? Because I'd love to do a little exercise here. Have I still got time for that?
Yeah, go for it, Jamie.
Yeah, okay, great. So here we have a range of different sort of categories of skills. There are many things within this, within perspective skills, within what it takes to have complexity awareness. But this is a communications framework that people find very helpful for reviewing the whole territory. So let's have an example of long-term orientation and visioning. There are things that you can do at the beginning of meetings that demonstrably change how long-term your decision-making is going to be. So you mentioned the 7 generations, which is from indigenous traditions. There's one from the Future Generations Ministry in Wales. This is a government department that looks out for the effect of policies on future generations. And they suggest that what we do, and for those of you who would like to try this out, we can do this now, which is to, just for a moment, close your eyes if that's helpful, but try and imagine the youngest person that you're close to. Might be a baby, a toddler, a child, the youngest person that you're close to, and just kind of bring them into the room here with us. And then the oldest person. Might be a parent, a friend, a grandparent, the oldest person that you're close to. And then for a moment, just for a couple of beats, imagine what the world was like when the oldest person you've imagined was as old as the youngest person you imagined. So in the past, when that person was young, what the world was like and what that person perhaps wanted for their life, where they hoped things might go. And at any time, if this exercise becomes too difficult or challenging, or there's too much emotion around, please feel free to drop it. Can stir up things. Let that imagination go, that image, and then think about what the world is, the world that the youngest person that you're close to will inhabit when they are as old as the oldest person. And think about the world that you want them. Not just the world that you fear that they might have, if that's the way you think it might go, but also the world that you wish for them. In the wildest dreams, perhaps. What would you like the world to be like when the youngest person you've imagined is as old as the oldest person? And then letting that image go as well. Perhaps shaking it off if that had some charge to it. And there's evidence to show that this does change our frame from our normal decision-making time scale. That can be 6 months, 2 years, at most. Having that perhaps even more sort of spiritual lens in terms of what is most profoundly important about being human in the room with us when we make decisions. So leaving that now and going on to relating, what we found is that organizations from as diverse as like the Stockholm School of Economics to Google have realized that they can't just train their students or their colleagues to be really good at accountancy or economics or coding. They also have to really develop the ability to collaborate and to lead each other. Actually, the World Economic Forum asks annually what companies need, and within the sort of top 3 or 4, they're sort of dominated by relating capacities, which is often surprising to many people. And if we're going to be working together, connecting to ourselves, to each other, to nature, these capacities are absolutely key. Moving on here to collaborate, there are activities, of course, you can do compassion training, but beyond meditation, there are things like bubble hopping, where you can choose and try and seek out people who have different views to you. So this is one thing that the Stockholm School of Economics does. They encourage their students to reach out to people who they don't know in different political persuasions and go to lunch with them. It's called bubble hopping. And then in collaborating, we have communication skills. I'll just gloss these actually because I think I'm taking up too much time here, Prachir. And then acting. So yeah, thank you. I want to move on to the conversation now.
No, thanks so much, Jamie. That was a very helpful overview, and I think particularly to help ground some of the theory into practice through that exercise, which it seems like even from the chat was really profound for people. So thanks for sharing that. Arielle, I'll just turn it over to you if there's anything you'd want to add to that overview.
I know there was a question in the chat, and on the website, there is all different tools that you can use to kind of deepen your practice of these skills. So it's a good place to look. I just want to underscore, I think one of the most beautiful things about the framework, one, that it was co-created, and 2, that it's open source. So it's really meant to be distributed and applied to local contexts, but also ripple effects in our global world. And that's really exciting. We'll also talk about the global survey launch. Again, that really emphasizes the need for inclusion and diversity and co-creative in how we put this framework out into the world.
Thanks so much, Arielle. And yeah, looking forward to bringing up that survey. So I'll jump into some questions now. And I think one, looking particularly at the context of the climate space, Jamie, I'm curious if there's any skills or qualities that you found in your work with organizations to be particularly relevant to or lacking in the climate space particularly.
Yeah, thanks. This really speaks to my work over the last few years, looking at the inner dimension of the climate crisis. So I worked with a leading sustainability sciences professor, Professor Christine Wamsler, to produce a report, I've got a copy here actually, called Reconnection, Meeting the Climate Crisis Inside Out. So this is like the first public policy report about the inner dimension of the climate crisis. And it frames the climate crisis has primarily perhaps a relationship crisis, a crisis of disconnection from ourselves, from each other, from nature. And this has been a drift of disconnection that's happened over centuries. And actually, the cognitive and emotional underpinnings of connection can be reinforced. So that's what's kind of lacking. And two of the key things that can help, I think, are mindfulness, so awareness, which helps with connection to self, other, and nature in important ways, and compassion, which I don't have to sort of emphasize is all about compassion, and it's all about connection and connection to others when they're in distress. And that's what we'll be, deeply called into in the coming decades, as we should be already, given the impacts are being felt and people are losing lives and livelihoods and things. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, Arielle, I'll turn it over to you. Was there anything you'd want to add, things that stick out particularly in the climate sector in terms of skills and qualities that you think are relevant?
I don't feel like there's anything to that question that Jamie didn't touch on that I can speak to right now. Yeah, thanks, Prachir.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, I very much resonate sort of with that relating piece, and I've had that exact same thought that there is sort of this relational crisis at the root of it. So thanks for putting the perspective on that topic. Arielle, maybe we'll turn to you now and just would love to hear, through your work with the hubs and working with communities who are doing this work, are there any stories or examples that you share that you think can really capture the impact of this work and the importance of doing it?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question, and I'd love to just paint a little bit of context beforehand. I think one of the signs of our collective thirst for inner development is right now we are at over 500 IDG hubs across 80 countries with an average of 1 new hub a day. And I think the headline for this is "We are building the bridge as we walk." This is a lot about emergence, not knowing and learning together. Right now, we have 16 hubs across Canada, and these hubs get to really focus on the matters that are most important to them, matters like social entrepreneurship, learning, innovation. We also have hubs that are cross-collaborating, that care deeply about institutionalizing the IDGs within Canada. There are also cross-collaborations happening with Canada and North America. I wanted to share 2 really powerful stories. One comes from the IDG Vancouver Island Co-Inspire Hub, where they're innovating towards the SDGs and co-creating a transformation leadership program together. And one of the practices that they actually use, which speaks to the power of visioning that Jamie was speaking to, is they start their hub meetings with a mini visualization of what healthy community actually look like. So they imagine if all the SDGs in their community were already met, what that would actually feel and experience be like. And Jamie from the Tamarack community, I wonder if you can share in the chat the actual template that they use for this practice. There's also a beautiful story that comes from an IDG practitioner. She is a career coach, and she often works with entrepreneurs, supporting them in designing socially responsible businesses or pursuing impact-driven career paths aligned with the SDGs. And I found this story to be so powerful. She shared, "Complexity awareness is perhaps a skill in the IDG framework that I find most powerful, particularly for underrepresented communities. A client of mine, an immigrant, once shared, 'I don't need help with resumes or job searches when moving to Canada. I need to understand how the systems work here.' Another client of mine, a woman of color with years of suffering from assimilation, now aspired to use her lived experience to serve in human rights and gender equality. The IDG framework offers a sustainable way to nurture the next generation of change makers, focusing on empowerment rather than mere enablement." And I just thought that story was so inspiring. I want to check in about time, Prachir, because I know we have a video that we wanted to share as well.
Yeah, I think we're good to share that, so I can bring that up. And thanks so much for those reflections, Arielle. I think the one from the group in Vancouver really resonates with me, because I think when you envision what the SDGs look like in your community, I can imagine that looking different from community to community, but also seeing some really universal themes that all of us would resonate with. So that's really beautiful. And yeah, I'm happy to pull up the video. Maybe if you just want to, I'll pull it up, and in the meantime, maybe just give a bit more context to where this was coming in from.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is from a hub in Florianopolis, Brazil, where they really have oriented their purpose to experiences in nature. So they walk you through just what that looks like for them in their own local context, applying the inner development goals. Prachir, maybe while you're working on that, there is one other thing that I wanted to share as you're troubleshooting that. So there's also a global practitioners network, which is a hub that is all about deepening practice. And I notice a lot of you are curious around what practices can you bring to your communities and to your organizations. So Jamie, I think, has put in the chat the community page on the IDG website. You'll see a calendar invite for the Global Practitioner Network right now with 600 members across 60 countries, 23 of those members actually from Canada, where they're bringing different practices. For instance, a new practice around well-being, shifting mindsets and transforming systems is actually happening right now. There's also been a play on Canada's own Percolab's Listen For, where people tell powerful stories, and what you're listening for are the IDG skills, and then being able to witness back what you hear in their story. So for people who want to get more familiar and connected with organizations and practitioners, the Global Practitioners Network is a great place to start.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that, Arielle. And yeah, we'll be sure to share those resources in the chat. And I think we have the video good to go now, so I will play that.
Olá pessoal, I'm Jennifer Batista and I'm going to tell you a bit about how we got here. Florianopolis is an island with very accessible nature, so we decided to prioritize outdoor activities for our hub. We have already gone through meetings on the beach, lagoons, co-working overlooking the forest and trails, where community members volunteer to propose activities around the pillars, being, thinking, relating, and collaborating. The next one will be an invitation to act together. Thus, we see an organically growth of a hub that puts life at the center and plants actions that can expand in favor of the IDGs global development. This is just the beginning. See you soon.
Oh, I love that. Is that Ocarina? What's that?
That's Florianopolis. That's Rafaela Rolim with
I
Nature
actually meant,
Experiences.
what was the instrument? It sounded
I'm not sure.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Arielle. That was beautiful, and it's great to see some of this work going on the ground. I'm curious, Jamie, to hear, we've heard a bit about, the work that's been done with communities, and I'm curious now to hear about what the response has been from the organizations you've worked with. And, I'm sure folks on the call maybe are interested in understanding, are there some that still see this as a nice to have? Do most sort of understand the importance of this work and are willing to dedicate resources to it? I saw a question in the Q&A as well about how to bring this frame of thinking to those who may not initially resonate with it. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on what that's looked like.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to say that this is really early days, that this initiative is barely 3 years old. And so the amount of enthusiasm and adoption in that short amount of time is phenomenal. But it hasn't had enough time to really see this being we haven't got the kind of solid evidence to say this is definitely being adopted in deep ways, apart from in a few organizations. So we have a document which I think is going to be in the chat. Is that right? Which is case studies of organizations like IKEA, Google, Ericsson, and some smaller companies, and some of them are using the framework to shape what they're already doing, but making sure that they have they haven't missed any gaps, and using it as a communication framework to go out to their colleagues. And amongst the, I think, 100 or so corporate partners of the Inner Development Goals, there's a huge, range of ways in which the framework is being used. It's important to say that this is a communications framework. This isn't itself a kind of pedagogy or a curriculum or a course that they can do. And we're hoping that by being part of this global network, by being a partner with the initiative, it will help sort of spur them on to greater investment and more profound transformation. But at present, this is the starting of a global collaboration, of a global conversation, if you see what I mean. And in the government and sort of public sector, we know of 1 or 2 countries that are already using the Inner Development Goals framework, again, to sort of shape their learning and development for public servants, particularly around what skills are needed to deliver on the sustainability agenda. But there are many more that are interested in using it, and we'll be working over the next 2 or 3 years to get the first kind of training programs implemented that are that can be potentially scaled to sort of across government.
That's great. Thanks for that overview, Jamie. And I think maybe now, just looking at the time, we'll jump into some of the questions that you've all been dropping in the Q&A box, but please feel free to continue to do so and vote for the ones that are particularly resonating with you. I think, we just touched on one from Judith about how to introduce the idea of the IDGs to those who are maybe not familiar with it or don't embrace this way of thinking. I see another one on how you navigate, from an anonymous attendee, on how you navigate tensions between bigger companies and grassroots movements. And Jamie, I'll turn to you, about the sort of the bigger companies, but Arielle, maybe you can speak a bit to sort of the grassroots movements and any challenges you've seen there, or any where it's been particularly resonating, and how sort of you've been able to support the work going on a more grassroots level.
I think that there's actually a lot of power in what Jamie's pointing to around that this is a shared language. It's not an arrival, it's an entry point. And so, for instance, a practitioner once shared, it's like scrolling through a book and being like, aha, this is the thing I've been looking for. And because it's so beautifully curated, it makes it easier to just initiate a conversation, being like, okay, what is this? What comes up for you? What are your thoughts in this framework? Not about a right or wrong, but really coming from a place of curiosity. And how do you see this connecting to the things that are most important to you? I think from a grassroots perspective, addressing these challenges is what I'm noticing in the hubs ecosystem is hubs are supporting each other around shared purpose. For instance, inside more corporate larger institutions, and starting to prototype together. Okay, how can we support each other even if we are not using the grassroots movement to then be able to enter an organization in a place that's going to resonate based off of shared learning. So in some instances, I think it can be a win-win.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, and sort of taking that more entrepreneurial approach to help bring this into larger systems and contexts. That's great. I see a question in the Q&A box from Colin, and Jamie, I think you could speak to this given some of your past experiences. How can we persuade policymakers to do this inner development work on and amongst themselves?
Yeah, thank you. And I think I also saw Colin make a point earlier on about the work that Reconnects by Joanna Macy, who is obviously, a standout leader in this field over decades. And the Reconnection report has a case study on her, so I just wanted to respond to that one as well. Colin, our leaders, once they get into office, if we're talking about national politics, are under enormous pressure. And it's been part of my role over the last 10 years to work with members of parliament in Britain and in some other countries. I've been invited to help introduce mindfulness training, where it's been active since about 2013 in the UK. So I've done events in the Canadian Parliament, Ireland, France, across Scandinavia, where politicians genuinely, some politicians really want ways in which they can show up better, they can be better at their jobs, and they can manage the stresses that they're under. They have, on average, worse mental health than the average citizen. They're working often sort of 70-hour weeks, and although they're really stretched, if you can package it in a way that starts from where they are, starts within their time-constrained positions, and you frame it like this, this will help you be more present in a constituency meeting when someone is coming to you with great pain and they're asking for your help. This will help you, listen and respond in a compassionate way. And if you frame it like that, actually that appeals to a lot of them. If you say, this will also help you be less stressed and help with your personal relationships as well, that often appeals. So I think we might be surprised if we, as a public, thought that this was something worth investing in. The problem is we tend to think, this is an indulgence. Politicians shouldn't be spending time out of their day to meditate or whatever. Or at least that's the fear that politicians have. They think if I do this, I'll let people know about it. The public will think it's an indulgence. We need to say, no, this isn't an indulgence. This is, in order for you to be the representative that we need, the leaders and the sense makers chief, on behalf of society in this incredibly complex time, you need to do this work on yourself. And that's the main thing, because the people willing to provide the training courses are there. The politicians actually want to do it. It's a kind of cultural block we have at the moment that we need to overcome.
Yeah, that's resonating a lot with me, and I think it's shifting that perspective that this work, being done by policymakers is not important in spite of everything that's already on their plate, but because of it, and it very much being an avenue to be able to do it and show up meaningfully every day. I'm just taking a look.
I'll drop.
Yep.
We published a report. This other group that I work for called the Mindfulness Initiative in September, which is a summary of the impact of mindfulness training in the British Parliament over 10 years. So if you're interested in that, then check that out.
That would be great. Thanks, Jamie. I'm just taking a look at a few more questions in the chat, and maybe we'll try to roll some of them into one. Got a question from Carolyn looking at any higher education organizations that have developed curriculum related to the IDGs, and also looking from Jovan in the chat if there's any differences between how the public sector and the private sector have taken on the IDGs in terms of their approaches. Arielle, I'll turn it to you first if you have any thoughts on those.
Yeah, I think in terms of higher education, there's a lot of hub collaboration that's happening right now. And my suggestion would be to go onto the hub's page on the IDGs, and a lot of times you'll actually see higher education in the name of the hub. And I would just invite you to reach out to them directly, because I know there's a lot of different experimentation that's happening. Yeah, and Jamie, I'll kick it off back to you about the private sector.
Right, I have to practice the IDG skill of humility here, because I wasn't listening. I was reading questions in the in the Q&A, so I'm really sorry.
No. Yeah, no, I appreciate you taking a look at the chat and the Q&A as well. Just looking at any differences in terms of how the public sector and the private sector have taken on the IDGs in this work.
Yeah, like I say, it's early days. The private sector tend to be ahead in this kind of thing, like in innovation. And if the private sector are sort of 20 years behind where the evidence base is, the public sector are kind of 40 years behind. And that sort of reflects it. We have one or two departments within interested in using the framework, or rather already using it, and we're in conversation with others, like in the White House, to look at it more broadly. But compared to, say, big multinationals that have adopted it and are investing in it, or in a big way, it's there's not a huge amount of difference, but it's just it's perhaps slower to react to this kind of thing more generally.
Jamie, as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing something that I found exciting. This is an initiative out of Switzerland, but they brought together 100 SMEs for an immersion into IDGs, cross private and public. And the multi-stakeholder sector engagement to me is super fascinating, and the cross collaboration between hubs. And I do think there's a lot of learning that's happening in that regard, how to bring these different sectors together.
Great.
That's great to hear about, and I think would very much resonate with, our audience and in Tamarack, given, the intention to take this collective impact approach to our work and bringing different stakeholders together. And so just looking at time, unfortunately, we won't be able to get all of the questions that have been coming in, but thank you all so much for sharing them, and hopefully we've been able to capture most of what was shared there. I'll just have a final question for both of you, which is just quickly on a practical level, how can folks on the call today and the organizations they're part of get involved with the IDGs and work on it themselves?
Arielle, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I think we seeded a couple of ideas, but please go to the community page, check out the tools, sign up for a calendar event, head to the Global Practitioners Network. If you're interested in learning more about starting a hub, you can also check out that page or reach out to me directly. And we have this really exciting global survey that we are launching that I wonder if you want to speak to a little bit, Jamie.
Yes, thank you. So we have a framework. It's something of a first attempt, though, because it has the experts that were most available for us to ask tended to be in the West, North America and Europe. So what we need now is a global framework. What we have now resonates globally, but we can't say it's genuinely global because of that skew. So what we now want is to do the same job again, but the same sort of research again, but try and get responses from 100 different countries. And the ambition is to get 1,000 responses from 100 different countries, making 100,000 altogether. And so we need particularly if you're in wherever you are. But I'm thinking about, this is a great opportunity to really raise the number in Canada, where I think we have maybe sort of 150, 200. We need another 800 from Canada. So I'm just going to share my screen again, if that's all right, and show the and show the QR code for people to scan. I guess you actually can just post it in the chat, can't you? But sorry, Prachir.
Yeah, no worries. We can definitely drop that in the chat.
There you go. Yeah. So please take the time to go to this website to answer that simple question that we answered. You've already answered it. Just take your answers and stick them in this survey, which is what skills, qualities, capacities do we need to create a more sustainable and equitable world, and also send it to the 3 wisest people you know. And if you did that, and if they answered the survey, that's it. In one shot, this webinar has achieved the goal in Canada of getting 1,000 responses. And hopefully we will then be able to have a genuinely culturally inclusive global language for us to be able to talk about this important missing dimension of societal flourishing and the solutions that we need.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jamie. I see we're at the top of the hour, but we just have a few closing announcements. And I'll just start off by thanking everyone for joining us and participating today. Your comments and questions made for a really lively discussion, and I hope you're feeling inspired to work towards the IDGs in your work. Thank you, Arielle and Jamie, so much for the perspectives you've brought today and for sharing your amazing expertise and insights with us. It's been noted in the chat, but you will all receive an email with the recording of today's webinar, as well as the many resources that were shared in the chat and on the call. Before you head out, we'd also really appreciate if you could fill out the event survey that'll be on your screen after. It helps us understand how we can make future webinars more valuable and engaging for you. And speaking of future webinars, the CCT team at Tamarack has a few coming up. We have the food security edition of our ongoing climate and affordability series, which is on January 15th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, and a webinar on Indigenous partnerships for the SDGs on January 30th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, which feels like a very natural sort of segue from our conversation today. And lastly, if you have any questions or feedback or want to learn more about the work of CCT and Tamarack, please feel free to reach out. My email is there on the screen, prachir@tamarackcommunity.ca. Thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays.